All right, well, welcome everybody. Philosophy 304. We're going to cover euthanasia today. We may get some other people joining us. Anybody notice any snow? Freezing cold temperatures outside?
No, it's actually really nice outside, if you ask me. Nice and sunny and warm. Ready to go swimming.
I know, it's kind of hot and humid today, right? I was very glad not to be out on the roads tonight. That's for sure. Well, I did get everybody's papers read. The essays were actually really good. So you should all feel really good about your first essays. There were a few mistakes that were made. I left comments on papers. So if you don't know how to read the comments on the papers, because maybe you haven't ever done that before, if you can't figure it out, then ask somebody. I don't always leave really important comments, but it doesn't hurt to check them out, because maybe I did. Maybe I left you some real critical information. So be sure to check out the comments on those papers and just use them so that you can learn for the next paper that you write. You have a better idea of what to do to get a better grade. But overall, they were very, very good papers. I really don't think I even read one bad paper. Even if they were short and you ran out of time, like the work that you did, it was good. And I was glad that people turned in stuff. Of course, I would have preferred that all the papers be full, but I could see at the time of submission that you were up against a time clock. So I was glad you at least submitted something. That's better. That's better for your grade than if you submitted nothing at all. So I'm glad that you showed me that you had some knowledge of the material and that you were following some directions from the grading rubric. That was a good sign. Any questions about the essays or anything? All right, well, what I'm planning on doing is we'll learn about euthanasia. We'll see if we can get some class discussion going and apply some of the ethical frameworks to some of our arguments, because that's a good way to practice doing that, to get a handle on those. And then I did email out the review sheet for the midterm. It's also in the files section on Canvas. So check your email if you haven't. If we were in person, I would have handed them out to you in person, hard copy, but right now, all you got is the email, and it's in the files section on Canvas. Any questions about the midterm? Hopefully the weather next Monday night will be better and we'll actually get to meet in person. All right, when it comes to the ethical issues surrounding euthanasia, what are the ethical issues that concern you the most? All right, well, what are the ethical issues surrounding euthanasia? Let's go with that one.
I feel like this is a lot harder of a topic than abortion is. In my opinion, I'm really just trying to think. Also, ignore my voice. I'm a little under the weather. But I feel a problem or an ethical issue would be with the patient or whoever would like to go under assistive suicide or just a lethal injection. Like, is that the right method, or should they go a different way with their life than trying to euthanize?
Okay. So you don't, so you feel like, or you believe that sometimes there is ambiguity on if it's really the best course of action, that there might be other options that should be taken. Is that right?
You could say that, but as a nursing major, since this is really kind of towards the medical side of things, I have to be a patient advocate and I have to listen to my patient. And if that's what my patient wants, then I need to respect their wishes and give that to the physician so that way they can move forward. And I will always advocate for my patient, even if it's a hard situation. I've definitely learned that in nursing school. You kind of have to put your feelings aside and really look into the patient's eyes and understand what's going on with them.
Okay. So one ethical issue is what's best for that person.
Yes.
Okay. What are some other ethical issues surrounding the issue of euthanasia? What are the issues that help you determine if euthanasia is a right or wrong option, a moral or immoral option?
I think how it affects the family. Like, yeah, it's that person's decision, but it affects their family, and they need to take that into consideration as well. Because losing a loved one is not easy, and they're essentially choosing to lose themselves. I don't know.
Well, one thing I do want to bring up and is that euthanasia actually comes from the Greek meaning good death, meaning good death. So, and that there are 4 different types of euthanasia. The first one is called voluntary euthanasia, and this occurs when a competent and rational person gives informed consent to end his or her life. That's voluntary euthanasia, where that person makes a decision. They've either filled out some paperwork, uh, a living will, things like that, a DNR, things like that, where the person actually makes the choice, but that's voluntary euthanasia. The second one out of the 4 is involuntary euthanasia, and that occurs when a person is unable or unwilling to give consent, and then the person's life is just ended. This might happen if the person, is in a car wreck or, a water accident, and they didn't have a living will or a DNR. And so perhaps they're brain dead, perhaps there's no hope of recovery, whatever those options are. But involuntary euthanasia would be like when the family or the medical professionals decide to take them off of a ventilator that's keeping them alive, and the person didn't ask to be euthanized or allowed to die, but so that because of that, it's called involuntary. So there's voluntary euthanasia, involuntary euthanasia, and then there's active euthanasia, which means that you take direct action, such as a lethal injection, in order to kill someone. And then there is, and Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who is also known as the Doctor of Death back in the 90s, who went to jail for it. People that were terminally ill or wanted to end their lives would go to him, and he would actually inject them or do something that would intentionally take their life. That's called active euthanasia. When there's a lethal injection or something actively meant to take somebody's life. And then there's passive euthanasia, and that means that you allow a patient to die by withholding life support or medical treatment that would prolong their lives. So that would be a situation where if someone had, permanent brain damage or there was no brain activity, but the ventilator was keeping them on alive, physically alive. But then you took the ventilator off. Passive euthanasia means that you take the ventilator off and you allow the natural course of action to do what it does. And if the person can live, which you don't expect them to, then they will die. But instead of killing them, instead of murdering them, instead of intentionally taking their life, you just withhold treatment or medicine that prolongs their life, and you let the natural course of action take place. So that's called passive euthanasia. Any questions about those? Okay, I only shared that just because I wanted everybody to understand that there's not just one type of euthanasia, and that when we talk about the ethical issues surrounding them, it kind of depends on if you're talking about active euthanasia or passive euthanasia, or voluntary or involuntary. All right, so what do you think? What are some of the ethical issues that you think of when you're debating the morality or immorality of euthanasia?
I guess the one that I was talking about was voluntary euthanasia, where you
Okay.
make your own decision. And then I know, like, I'm pretty sure the spouse also has to sign off on it, if that's right or not, like to allow that person to make that decision. But other than that, it really would hurt the rest of the family if they do have family. So that's the issue I see with it, with voluntary euthanasia.
Okay. Is there ever a time that voluntary euthanasia would be ethically acceptable?
Well, yeah, a lot of cases, if you are in pain and suffering and you really don't have that long to live, or you will be living a life of pain for the rest of your life, I mean, I think it's ethically correct. It's your choice. It's offered to you by society. I forget which one that is. The one where society says it's acceptable, so it's ethical.
Are you talking about rights theory, where it's
Yeah,
legal,
probably right.
legal or illegal? I mean, if it's
Yeah.
legal, then
Yeah.
okay. How about the rest of you? Is there ever a time that, when would be the time when it would be immoral, and when would be a time that it'd be moral for active euthanasia or voluntary euthanasia, where you asked for that?
I would say that for where it would be unethical is when the person themselves isn't able to make that decision, only because it's not the family's life, it's their own life. So like I don't think that you should decide that, but it can also be really tricky because depending on what illness they have, it's really hard to get some sort of answer, I guess. So maybe educating patients or people on like having that active will or having something, so then people know what they want to do when they get to that situation.
Okay. Thank you, Jasmine.
This might be a long shot, but honestly, if you just don't think you want to live anymore and you just want to take that big leap of let's do euthanasia, I don't think that should be allowed. I feel like that should only be, done with patients that are, or people that are having a lot of pain in their life and just not a way out of life for anyone to get out.
Okay. All right. So you're saying that it's okay if people have DNRs, living wills, things like that. But if they're depressed or just have a desire to end their life, then they should then it would be immoral in that case.
Yeah, I just think there are better options for them to take to hopefully, I don't want to say save their life, but give themselves a better opportunity to live out the rest of their life. I feel like euthanasia should just be used for those people that are in a lot of pain and have been in pain for a long time.
Okay.
I just wanted to like branch off what Allie was saying. I think that a lot of times I've like watched a lot of documentaries on that sort of topic with like mental health issues, and I know a lot of people who have like tried to commit suicide, they like regret that decision. So I think it's like would be smart if we don't allow people who are in that state to decide on that as well.
Okay. Okay. What are some other ethical issues that surround this issue of euthanasia? What do you think is more important? Is it more important to have the right to life or the right to liberty, in which you could use your liberty to actually destroy your own life? What's more fundamental to us? Is it our right to liberty or the right to life?
I mean, personally, in my opinion, you were put on this earth for a reason. Now, granted, you have that timeline of your start date and end date. God knows when you're going to start your life and end your life. I feel like you should live out your life as best as possible, and whatever's thrown at you, if something is thrown at you, then deal with it and cope with it and figure out a way to work with it. But I feel like live your life out as best as you can because you only live once and life's short anyways.
Thank you, Allie. How about somebody we haven't heard from yet? What's more important? Is it more important that we have the right to life, or is it the right to liberty, in which we can potentially use that liberty to end our own lives?
I feel as if the right to liberty is more important. If you've reached the point in your life that you feel that you need to end it, I mean, that sounds very, very, I guess, like wrong, but if help has been like seeked properly and you feel as if the only option left is like legal euthanasia, I believe that you have every right to do so. If that you've shown that help has been like sought after.
So that's an important piece, is that there are some steps to go through, that if you're going to use that liberty to take your own life, that there are some steps to go through that help protect you from making a rash or a wrong decision. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I think it'd be the right to life, kind of like going off what Ali and Jasmine was saying, like life's short and a lot of people like don't get, I don't know, like a lot of people take life for granted, I think. And like what Jasmine was saying, like people that have attempted suicide, like they survived it, usually they'll tell you like they regret it. So I just think it's important to like do the things that you can to live your life to the fullest. And like Ali said, like everybody goes through stuff. You just kind of have to figure out how to deal with it and go with it, because you shouldn't be taking life for granted. Like, for the reason you're here, like, I don't know. So that's just my opinion.
Okay. I think
I think the
it's
right
a hard
to
question. Oh, go ahead, Alon. Go ahead.
I think the right to liberty, in my opinion, is more prominent because I personally would not want to dictate on someone's life or on someone's life decisions. You never know what they're going through. Maybe they have an incurable disease that their quality of life is going to be very, very poor. So who am I to say, no, you can't do it? You know, if people have the right to not seek medical treatment, what is the difference here? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just
Yeah.
personally can't dictate on the life of others because I'm not in their shoes. So I just think that people should have the liberty to do that if they so choose.
Thank you, Alon.
I
I
think
definitely
too.
agree with Alon. I definitely agree with Alon.
I think too, though, like, okay, if you look at
Thanks,
it,
Jalen.
if somebody in like a case like me, Jasmine, and Allie were talking about, like, if somebody's just, they're depressed and feel like they want to end their life, like, so if the difference between them going to get voluntary euthanasia or them actually like committing suicide on their own, like, people would have different views on that. Like, if somebody were to actually say like overdose or something on part, like to kill themselves, people wouldn't be so, well, like, I don't know. I've seen a lot of that in my life. And like, everybody always has a comment or an opinion when somebody commits suicide. So what's the difference if they go to the hospital to get euthanasia to kill themselves? Because they're still killing themselves. So, like, I definitely think that it needs to be for medically, like, I don't know how to explain it, but like we were talking about, like, people who aren't gonna get better, like severely ill, like end of life patients, not just somebody that's depressed and feels like they need to end their life.
I agree with that. Like, suicide always has a negative connotation. Like, I'll always hear people say that it's so selfish to commit suicide and stuff. But then euthanasia has sort of a positive connotation to a lot of people, just because it's a physician doing it. So that is kind of a wrong thing, I guess.
Right. Well, for the most part, active euthanasia is mostly considered murder in the United States. There are some places, like more and more, it seems like death with dignity, stuff like that. There are places you can go if you wanted to end your life. This is, for instance, important to me because, like, if I ever had full-blown Alzheimer's, I don't want to live for another 8 to 10 years. So I don't know what I would do, but I know that there's places that you can go where your life could be ended if you wanted it to be. And for me personally, that would be an important liberty that that I'd like to be able to have access to. And I'm sure it's not just me. I'm sure there's other people that feel that way as well.
Another thing to bring up is if euthanasia is like made completely illegal, it's still going to happen. Suicide is still going to be a thing. If they do take measures into their own hands, think about if, say, they do something where it kind of messes up their face, you can't have an open casket, and that hurts even more. I've gone through it with people that I know. Having an open casket at least gives you the chance to say goodbye, rather than if you can't even have an open casket, you can't see them for one last time.
That is true, Jalen. That is true. It's a little bit like I don't know, maybe it's similar to the argument about abortion, where some people will make the argument that it's immoral to take away the right or the ability for a woman to choose an abortion, because women would still have abortions, they just wouldn't be safe. And
it causes more harm than
Right. Yeah. And so one might argue, well, there should be physician-assisted suicide because, uh, you know, it would just be in a weird way, it would actually be safer or more humane. I guess more humane would be the way to say it. I don't know. That's just one argument that could be made. I'm not making it, although I probably would make it, but I'm not making it for the purposes of this class.
I just think, like, going back to what Jasmine said, like, most people who attempt suicide, if you act like if they survive it and if you like actually sit down and have a conversation with them and like talk to them, chances are they'll say like they regret it. It was just like they had a moment, or like it was just like something like really personal. But my freshman year at Culver, I actually did have a suicide attempt, and it was the scariest thing I had ever been through. One of the nursing majors actually like is the one that called the ambulance, and I got taken out of the wood hall and stretcher, and it was the scariest thing. And like once I got fluids and stuff, and I was fine, but I was so thankful that I was fine, because like I have a little sister and I have friends, and like you realize like you do have people, and like it's not worth it. Like, and like I'm not gonna go into detail why I did it. I've seen a lot, been through a lot in my life, but like it's just, I don't know, I feel like there's other options. Like it's just not, and like that's not just me. Like most people will tell you like they regret it, or like they wish they would have done something else to get help first. Like, so that's just me.
Thank you for sharing, Bree. You know, this really, suicide is a final decision if you're successful with it. So if we just think about how many times we're wrong about things, you know, that we used to think about or used to have a perspective on, and you know, a lot of times those problems have a way of working themselves out. So, you know, even though I'm personally a libertarian when it comes to a person's decision to choose, I do think that there ought to be a lot of safeguards, and that just like with the issue of abortion, where I think there's some societal responsibility to provide support and care. I hope that that happens. I hope that people have that in their lives, so that they don't, so that as few people as possible gravitate towards suicide. What about quality of life versus quantity of life? Does that ever play a role in euthanasia? Quality of life versus quantity of life. You know, I had a family in my church that got Huntington's disease. And if you don't know anything about Huntington's disease, it's a disease that ravages your body and your motor skills, and I guess probably your mind too. I don't know how much your mind, but I know that you lose your motor skills and can't move and you can't talk and things like that. And uh, basically, a mom and two boys got it. Two of them ended up in the nursing home for an extended period of time. I think they said that she wasn't supposed to live past like 3 years, and she ended up living for 20 years. And her quality of life, I mean, she was at Good Sam nursing home, and they were really, really good at how they cared for her, but her quality of life was very low. And I always wondered, you know, living 20 years like that, I just questioned, you know, would it, in that case, she had quantity of life, but she didn't have quality of life. Does that ever justify the a decision to choose euthanasia? Where is that balance?
I feel like with Huntington's, it's so progressive, and it damages the body. So I feel like if she wanted to go through euthanasia, that's fine. If her quality of life was extremely poor. Granted, she extended her life, which totally respect that. Huntington's, excuse me, is nothing to mess with. So I totally respect that she made it 20 years, but if she wanted to go through euthanasia, I would have totally respected it.
No. No.
I say quality over quantity.
Why do you say that?
Just because why live a life that is so painful and not quality? I don't know. I would rather just be done and say I lived a good life for however long it was. If I was younger, if I was maybe before 40s or something, and I was faced with a decision like that, that'd be a different story. But if I was an elder and that happened to me, I would say, yeah, I lived a good life and that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
And oh, sorry, go Bree.
I think too, like at the hospital, like you'll hear, like I talk to a lot of the patients, like because I work at the hospital, and a lot of them will tell you like they're so sweet, the old people, but like they'll be like, I've lived a good life, so like I'd rather take a good last few months than. I feel like that's something you hear a lot. Like they'd rather take a good few months than miserable for an extended amount of time. So I think when it's like that and it's like a serious medical condition and like it is gonna make it worse for them to continue living, like I do think it's quality over quantity.
Okay.
I totally agree with that. If she wanted to do it, go ahead, because quality is so much more important than quantity if you were in that much pain. And if you were going through any terminal disease like that or aggressive disease, I totally would agree with going through euthanasia.
I also agree with him. Like when my grandma had cancer, she had been fighting it for like 3 years, and she finally just decided that the sickness that like she went through with like chemo and stuff wasn't worth it, that she just wanted to live while she could, and then she just let like life take its natural course and just like quit chemo so she could live her life.
Right. Right. So what kind of euthanasia out of the four that we've talked about, what kind would you say your grandma, since she just didn't take the treatment that was offered to her?
I would probably consider it like voluntary, I guess, because she was on chemo for like 3 years and she finally just, was done with it. And she lived until her body just couldn't, like the cancer had taken over completely. So
That would be voluntary passive euthanasia, because nobody injected her with anything that led to death. It was just her decision to stop that treatment and just let the natural course of action. So since it was her decision, it was voluntary, but because you just withheld treatment, then that would be passive. So voluntary passive. And Lainey, what kind of ethical framework? I mean, obviously she probably didn't know about ethical frameworks. Most of us don't unless we take this class. But what kind of ethical framework would justify that decision that she made?
hold on. I don't really know, because like she fought for a long time with it before she ever like decided that. So I don't know. I don't know.
You think libertarianism, the decision, the
Probably because like she had decided for a while to be on the chemo and then
yeah.
decided to stop.
Yeah. Or maybe ethical egoism. Maybe she decided that this was in her best interest both times,
Right.
What do you think, Shelby, about the quantity of life versus the quality of life argument?
I would say I'm kind of on the fence. I kind of lean towards quality of life just because, like people have said previously, that, I mean, I would just say I feel like people would regret it in the end. I know it's nothing we can really do about it. Like Jalen said, like if we try to stop it, I mean, we can't. Like suicide happens constantly and there's nothing we can really do about that. But overall, I'd probably have to say quality over life since it's so like valuable.
Okay.
I would say quality too, I think.
Why would you say that?
I just think that like how you talked about like if you had Alzheimer's or something, like I mean, yeah, you may not know it at the time, but like that's not you getting to live out your life the way you want to. And like you know that now that you wouldn't want to live like that. And it's really hard on like your family members to see you and like that and to just drag it out. I feel like that always just makes it worse. So if you had that decision, I think I'd pick quality.
It is kind of a hard decision, though, and it kind of depends on the situation, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I think to
Oh, well, nope, go.
okay. I think to further the argument for quality, I think for sure as we get older, our perception of death changes. Like we're not as scared of it once we hit our elder years, like 60s, 70s, maybe even 50s. I don't know. But the older we get, the less scared we are because we have hopefully lived a quality life. And when you're that age, if you're faced with a choice like this, then you wouldn't be as scared of the outcomes of death because you've done what you can, and what you wanted, and that's that.
Thank you, Braden.
What I was gonna say to back up what you were saying, Professor Hunt, and what Mackenzie was saying, was I think it is very situational. It really just depends on what that person is going through. If euthanasia is the best thing for them, then yeah, go through it. If you've lived a quality life, awesome. That's great. Quality, in my opinion, takes over when you're going through a situation. Other than that, I'd say quantity, but it really depends, again, on the situation you're going through.
Thank you, Allie. Charlie, what do you think when we talk about quality of life versus quantity of life? Which one's more important?
Personally, I've just been thinking about it like they're grapes. So grapes, you got a whole bag of grapes, a lot of them, a ton of them.
Yum.
They just sour and nasty.
Uh-oh.
The green grapes, you don't want the green grapes. Throw those away. Get the
I
red
love
grapes.
grapes. Get
Red grapes are better.
I
no.
prefer green.
Red grapes.
Thank you.
Red
Okay,
grapes
how
are
about this?
the
Your
best.
favorite grape versus your least favorite grape.
So whether you like your grapes sour or sweet, whatever you may prefer, you want whichever type of grape that you like, even if there's less of them. That's just how I've been looking at it. So the quality of life is much more important than living long. Because you could live a long life, but if you're miserable throughout the life, then you're just going to end up like Scrooge. You don't want to be the Scrooge. You want to be, who's a happy Christmas character? Oh, Santa. You want to be Santa.
I don't know. Just to be quite blunt, if you've seen the original Santa Claus and the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa's kind of a jerk. Santa's really a jerk. Even on Elf. Tell me Santa's not a jerk on Elf.
No, he definitely is. We got rid of him. So
You know, I think of the Grinch with this. Is he gonna live a quality life if he's gonna live in that cave? No. Go out, live your life, screw the cave, and be happy. That's all I gotta say.
Think about Robin Williams. I ain't gonna speak on it. Y'all can think what y'all want about that particular situation,
Dark.
but y'all know what happened.
Yeah.
And basically what we're talking about.
Yeah. You know,
And I mean, like with him, it looked like he had like a really good quality life, but to him personally, he didn't enjoy his life and like was miserable. So, I mean, and you just never really know. So it's all based on like you and your thoughts because nobody else really knows.
yeah, I didn't know.
No, because like in all the movies he was in, he was always like this funny guy who looked always so happy, but in reality, he wasn't.
Yeah, that was nuts. I remember the day news broke. It was just shocked me. And as far as grapes go, I got to give a shout out to cotton candy grapes.
Amen. They're
Those are
expensive,
so
but they're
good.
great.
What are those?
You haven't had cotton candy grapes,
Oh
Charlie?
my gosh.
Have
No,
you?
I don't even
Charlie.
like cotton candy.
Okay, but Allie, listen to me. Cotton candy grapes are green grapes.
Okay,
Cotton candy grapes.
I thought they kind of were. I couldn't
No.
remember for sure.
there is a difference. Green grapes are better than cotton candy grapes in my opinion, but I like sour. I'm a sour girl. That's all. That's just me.
Brother got a sweet tooth. But what are cotton candy grapes? I've never even heard of those until now.
Gosh, they're so good.
They
They
taste
just,
like cotton candy.
like literally. It's not like, oh,
Mhm.
they kind of taste like cotton candy. No, they taste like cotton candy.
Listen, if you
Oh.
watch Good Mythical Morning, you know when Link and Red were comparing things to cotton candy about what tastes like cotton candy the most. Cotton candy grapes were up there. I think they were like number 1 or number 2.
Yeah, they are expensive, aren't they? Like $4, $5, $6 a pound or something
Yep.
like that. Like
Yep.
it's a
It
little
depends
crazy.
where you go, but yeah.
I don't even like cotton candy, so I'll probably never try them.
Yeah, don't stay away. If you don't like cotton candy, you will hate these.
Okay, perfect.
Oh my gosh, I love cotton candy.
See, we're covering important issues here in this philosophy.
That was a great analogy, though.
I like it. Very creative. Love it. What about a duty to die? An example, just a general example might be my grandpa had Alzheimer's for about 5 years. He had no money. It was very, very difficult on the family to pay for his care. And once in a great while, he would have like these episodes of lucidity in which he would look at my mom and just say, I'm ready to die. This is miserable. And then he would just drift back into Alzheimer land. But where he's like, turning tables over, violent, not being the person that, he had been his whole life. And there were several years where it was really difficult for the family financially to pay for this. And you could see that for all the sacrifice that was being made, that he was a very unhappy person and he wanted his life to end because he said so multiple times. Is there ever a duty to die if the medical care or something is a burden to the family, or just plain difficult, hard on the family? Is there ever a situation where the sanctity of life, where the duty to die would exceed the sanctity of life?
I actually have a situation with that. My dog, Chance, yeah, we can bring this up with pets too. I mean, pets go through pain as well.
Yep.
My dog, Chance, she was 14 when she passed away. My parents, they actually chose to put her down, but the doctor told my parents, so like, if you keep her alive, we can do the treatment. You'd be keeping her alive for you, not for her well-being. And it's actually, I'm gonna get teary-eyed, I swear. My dad, he was with Chance when they put her down, and she smiled at him before she fell asleep. So I think that was her way of letting him know that she's grateful that she could be let go.
I actually had that exact situation with my cat. She was 23, well beyond her years. She couldn't really
Wow.
see anymore. Yeah, 23. Yeah, 23. And we'd had her since I was little. My stepmom had her before she met my dad. I grew up with her, but it got to the point where her kidneys were getting really bad. It was painful for her. She couldn't really see. It was just really bad. And like the only really senses that she had were like taste and smell. So she could smell where we were going and she'd follow us, but that's because that's the only thing that she could follow.
Okay.
And she would always want to be near us. And when we had to put her down, actually it was on Valentine's Day, which was really sad.
Oh,
But-
that's terrible.
Yeah. So
Was that just yesterday then?
well, it was in 2012.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's been a couple years, almost 10 years. But when we put her down, we all said our goodbyes. Me and my dad took her to the vet. I don't know why my dad took me with him. I was 11. Not a good idea.
No, I would agree with you.
Very scarring. But I was happy that I got to see her before, she left, because I grew up with that cat. That cat was all I knew. Okay, now I'm getting sad about it. But like I just saw that look in her eyes when she was like, "Thank you," like "I love you," and all of that. So, yeah.
I feel that, like, I mean, my parents, they told me I was in 8th grade after a track practice. We're walking into Hy-Vee. It's a grocery store in the Midwest. And I'm bawling my eyes out. But Chance was my safekeeper. That was my dog. They got her in September of 2000, and I was born in December of 2000. That dog was my safekeeper. She knew when I was having asthma attacks or flare-ups. I miss her so much, but I think it was a good thing that my parents decided to let her have the quality of life. I mean, I know that we kept her so long, but they finally just let her go. And all of her pain went away. Her kidneys, her eyes, her ears, she was frail. And her hips were displaced as well, so that was fun. But yeah, I'm glad they chose quality instead of quantity, because it would have caused more pain.
Allie, check your Snapchat. I'm actually crying.
Well, I do think it brings up a good discussion point, that it seems like with our pets, we oftentimes, maybe almost always, we choose quality of life over quantity of life. But it would seem, and I'm making a generalization which you may not agree with, and I'm not saying it's 100% right, but I'll just say, for the purpose of this discussion, I'll pose it this way. It seems like in the current medical system that quantity of life is more important than quality of life. Do you think that's true? Is there a difference on how we treat humans versus how we treat pets?
I feel like it depends on the system or the health system that you're in. Like, I've never worked at Blessing, but I worked at North Kansas City Hospital back home. That's actually where I was born, fun fact. And they actually, they actually do quality of life over quantity because they want to listen to their patients. Yes, is it hard? Of course. I actually did a shift on the oncology floor, and I learned a lot about quality of life there, because when patients wanted to stop, they stopped. They listened, and I was so grateful that they listened to their patients, because it is so important. But I think back home it's quality. I don't know how it is here, but I think it's quality back home.
Would you rather live a good life that might not be as long, or would you rather live long and miserable?
I mean, I'd want to live a quality life, not a quantity life.
I mean, I'm asking everybody.
Oh, okay.
Like, actually everybody. Would you rather live a short, happy life or a long, miserable one?
I'd probably say short and happy. Because me personally, I think you kind of live every day like it's your last. That's kind of like my motto. You just enjoy the life you have and like how you're, like what you're doing and everything, and just get through each day and like enjoy it. And I just kind of live by that motto, like make it count kind of thing, because you never know what's going to happen.
Is there anyone that would prefer a longer life that might not be as happy?
Kind of depends on like the nature of it, I guess. Is in general, I would just want to choose the quality of life, but you know, it kind of depends. Like, how long is the discomfort going to last? Is it going to last forever? We don't know. Sometimes it feels like it, and sometimes it seems like it, but things don't always turn out the way we expect, right?
I personally would choose like quality over quantity, but like you have to think too, like if somebody like has kids or something, like they would want to stay, not always I guess, but like some people might argue that they want to stay for their kids, like especially if they have young kids, like they don't want their kids to grow up without a parent. So like that would be somebody's argument, I guess, but I don't know.
I mean,
so I wouldn't want my kids to see me like living miserably though. So
I feel like it could go either way though. Like there's really no right or wrong answer, because everybody wants to live a nice, long, happy life, and you're majority in control of that, unless something like expected happens or unpredictable or anything like that. But you're really, at the end of the day, you're in control of how your life goes. So you have the choice of living a nice, happy, long, quality life if you do the right precautions, like you exercise and you eat right and you take care of yourself. And unless something unexpected happens, then that's a different story. But really, there's no right or wrong answer, I feel.
Yeah, it's really about a balance, isn't it, Pete? We're all just trying to balance quality of life versus quantity of life.
So as a person who's gone through this, my mom did take her own life. It does suck, but knowing what she's been through and how people have treated her growing up, I am not mad at it. It's something that you can get past, versus where if you're the one going through it, you won't know unless you're in that person's shoes. And I wasn't in her shoes. So how would I know how she felt about it? Because there were some things in her life where you really cannot change how they affected her. So in the end, it should be your choice. You shouldn't have to worry about what everybody else thinks. And that's for all of life. Making your decisions.
And what ethical framework
whether
is
it's be these people going to think of me, you shouldn't care.
What ethical framework would you use to support that
That
statement?
ethical egoism.
Good. Is there another one that
But yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about.
Is there another
That's
ethical
the one that
framework that
first
might
comes to
work
my
too?
Give me 1 second. Not would that be hedonism? I'm not completely sure. I'm thinking
How about libertarianism?
hedonism, but I'm not.
Libertarianism.
Yeah.
That we need to be able to make our own decisions. The freedom of will.
Right. Right. Your will isn't based on everybody else. It's based upon yourself.
Right.
I feel like something with the medical system would be care ethics. I think another thing with that is how does your, and I mean, this is for the nursing majors, of course, and if you're going into the medical field in a different part of medicine, awesome, that's great. Or just in general, care for people. I know we all do, and we
Yeah.
love that. But I
Yep.
think however you treat your patient will increase or decrease their quality of life, which could also affect their quantity of life. So,
Yeah.
however you care for the patient is extremely important. And that's why I know all the nursing majors in here are going to try their best to be the best nurses they can for their patients. Because at the end of the day, we want our patients to live as long as possible, but we also want them to have the best and most comfortable life as possible. And that's why I will always listen to my patient, because that is super important.
Yeah, that is important. Is anybody familiar? I know our medical people are, but if you're not familiar with hospice, it's a really important, it's just a really important place of care for people, because they will help you to prepare for the different stages of grief if you're a family member, and if you're a person that's going through the stages of death. And they will they will lovingly and be caring in helping you to make those transitions so that you understand things and that you have the support and care that you need. And hospice is definitely, they operate under care ethics, that care and sympathy offer better moral guidance than consequences or duty. And so hospice is a really important thing for people as they're going through, as they're coming to end of life issues. And really, in general, the idea that care and sympathy offer better moral guidance, it's really an important one. I mean, as a pastor, I use this all the time in ministry when people come to me and they're upset because a loved one has cancer or is going to have a bypass surgery or got COVID or maybe even died. What do I can't fix their problems, can I? But you know what I can do? I can let them know that they're loved. I can let them know that they're cared for. And it's amazing how people will respond when they just feel loved. I've seen people that really surprise you on how well they can bounce back as long as they feel like they're loved and they're cared for. Even, my conference minister, which is, like I'm in the local church, she's in like the Illinois conference, the United Church of Christ minister. We were on a Zoom call with a group of other ministers, and somebody asked her how she was doing. And instead of just giving us a pat answer, she shared how she was struggling. And I was kind of irritated with some of my colleagues because they listened to her pour her heart out appropriately, and then they made it all about them. Oh, what they were anxious about. And so I just stopped, when I finally got a word in edgewise, I called her by name and I said, Kathy, the things that you're dealing with are tough. And I just want you to know that we love you and that we support you and that we'll stand by you as you deal with these things. And then I asked her, I said, how can we be of help to you? And she said, at the end of the night, when we say a prayer together, if you would include me in it, I would really be grateful. And I just said that because I just know that if we are loved, good things happen. And so I think when it comes to physical health as well, or even emotional health, I think that care ethics is an important one to consider.
I thought of another analogy for what you were just talking about.
Okay.
It's like when a little kid scrapes his knee and his or her mom just kisses her hand and then smacks the knee that got hurt. And all of a sudden that kid miraculously feels better.
Yeah. That's perfect. That does happen.
I just keep coming up with these stories. Wow. I actually followed this TikTok account. It's called Holden Strong, and it was about a little boy. He just passed away in December. He had ATRT, which is a severe form of brain cancer. And at first, his parents, they kept pushing him through chemotherapy because they wanted him to live. But I think their care ethics and also ethical egoism kicked in. And they finally looked at their son and they listened to him because he deserved to live a quality life instead of keeping his life continuing his life, but having him go through pain. So they stopped treatment
Yeah.
and let him go peacefully. So I think
Yeah.
that care ethics and ethical egoism kicked in.
Mm-hmm. That's really important, Allie. And I think, you know, if anyone uses care ethics, the idea of listening to people is super important. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get text messages and I look at them so fast, I don't actually read the whole thing, but I think I do. And then later on, I find out, oh yeah, I was supposed to be there at 6 o'clock, not at 4 o'clock or something like that. It's like, oh, I just didn't take the time to really pay attention. And in care ethics, I think paying attention, slowing down, listening, you know, those are important things for people. When it comes to euthanasia, the most common practice of euthanasia in the United States is passive, because active euthanasia, for the most part, unless you're in a real specified place, that's considered murder. But the way that we get around that issue of murder in the United States is through a principle called double effect, the principle of double effect. And the principle of double effect tells us that for every action, there's an intended consequence and an unintended consequence. And that's why it's the principle of double effect, because there's always an intended consequence, but there's also an unintended consequence. So, for instance, and I'll need some help from some of you in the medical field, but say you have an elderly person that has a critical illness, they're not going to recover, and they're just in a state of decline, but they haven't died yet. The family all gets called in, they're gathering around, and the person continues to decline, but they're still alive. And they know that there's no hope of recovery. In most cases, what would the doctor prescribe for that person?
Our first thing always is our number one thing that we are taught right off the bat is we have to advocate for our patient. That is the number one thing that we are taught, is that whatever the patient wants, that is what we will do for them. If they do not want to be resuscitated, then that is exactly what we do. We do not resuscitate them. If they want a full code, we give them a full code. If they want, if they have it written down and they're still conscious that, if they get too far into a state where they're no longer able to take care of themselves and, they don't want to spend the rest of their days in a hospital bed, it's our job to advocate for our patient and for our patient only. It's up to them. In this case, if the patient is completely unconscious,
let's assume they are. Let's assume they're unconscious.
So then it would go to the next person. It would be to the spouse, whoever they are married to. If they aren't married to anybody, then it would go to a parent. But it's our number one job is to advocate for our patient. That's the most important thing.
You're talking about all patients, correct?
Yes.
So including, never mind.
So like, say this person is in an agitated state. You know, things are not working the way they're supposed to. They're unconscious, and there's no hope of recovery. But they're still alive, and you know they might hang on for an undisclosed amount of time. What would be a pretty common course of action at that point?
We keep them comfortable. That if that's the only thing that we can do, we keep them comfortable.
And how do you keep them comfortable?
Probably, I mean, there's different types of medications that we can prescribe to help with pain. And that's a way that you can keep them comfortable. Making sure that they're positioned in a way that makes them comfortable. You know, getting them water, putting a rag over their head, maybe massaging their hands with lotion or their feet, or just anything that can help them relax and just make them comfortable. Things that, you know, make people comfortable.
And don't you actually call that comfort care?
I believe so, yeah. It is what we are taught at Blessing.
Yeah.
I don't know about any other nursing program, but at Blessing we are, when performing, whether it's a head to toe assessment or any type of assessment, we, you know, let's say we're giving our patient a complete bed bath. We are taught as nurses at Blessing that at the end of the bed bath, when it's completed, if the patient would like lotion on their hands or something, that we can sit there and rub their hands and, you know, massage their hands, or, you know, maybe put lotion on their feet. It's whatever the patient wants, because that's our job. It's what the patient wants in that state. And, you know, they're coming to an end.
But if someone's at the end of life and you see it coming, it's called comfort care. And so you're doing all these external things to bring them comfort. What kind of medicine might the doctor prescribe for comfort?
Morphine.
Yep. So the first day, they might get some morphine, right? And then after a few days, what happens to the amount of morphine potentially?
They would probably just get to a point. I mean, they're never going to. I'm really not sure. I don't think they would ever like increase it, because then, you know, you would be feeding into an addiction at that point, and we don't want that. So, and there's only so much that we can actually prescribe according to the patient's weight. You have to take that into consideration, their weight. There's only so much that we can give them, you know, that their bodies can handle.
Well,
I think like I've seen it a lot at the hospital, like what you're talking about, Professor, like the actual comfort care measures is like we see it a lot with like people that they're pretty sure aren't gonna make it.
Yeah.
And like before COVID, it was just like they'd bring the family in and they'd like make sure that they were like they had anything they needed, or things like that. Like besides just like providing normal comfort to patients, like it's kind of like an extra, like just because like they know the end's coming, so it's just like comfort care measures. So I think in that case, like they would be more willing to increase meds to keep the pain down, because the patient is most likely going to pass away anyway, and they're just doing what they can to keep them comfortable until that point. That's what I've seen personally working at the hospital. So
and Bree, that's an exact description of how it works in our current medical system. Is that, you know, say you see someone's body breaking down, their organs work worse and worse, if at all, you know, more things are breaking down and not working, the person becomes more uncomfortable, and you just can, and you know, it's not uncommon for the amount of morphine to just increase, and then after the morphine increases to a certain extent, the morphine causes some of the organs to stop working, and then the person dies. Is that a decent description of what happens sometimes?
I've never been like in the room like as far as that much goes, but I would think so, yeah. Like I know like last year there was somebody who was in, I believe she was almost in complete organ failure, like her kidneys and everything were shutting down, and they did move her to comfort care precautions. So and like in that situation when like complete organ failure, like they know that the patient's not going to make it, like it's just kind of like do what you can to keep them comfortable until that point.
So that's an example of a principle of double effect, whereas the intention is to bring comfort. That is the primary intention, is to bring comfort. But an unintended consequence would be that the amount of morphine that causes the organs to shut down, and I don't think that morphine is the only thing that's helping the organs to shut down. It's just one of the things that does happen, is the unintended consequences that the person does eventually die. So that's an example of the principle of double effect. The intended consequence is comfort. The unintended consequence is that in some cases the patient actually dies. And so there is actually sometimes the difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia literally comes down to the intent of the person that's doing the action. Because if the doctor intended, like, oh yeah, I want this person to die, so you jump up the amount of morphine, you could say that was active euthanasia, that they did it intentionally for the person to die. But in our system, that never happens. The doctors, the medical professionals, they offer that morphine in appropriate amounts, and the purpose and intent of it is to actually bring comfort. Some people actually argue that the intention between if someone dies or not with euthanasia, the intention shouldn't really matter. Like, either it's right for the person to continue to live, or it's wrong for the person to continue to live. And one of the, I can't remember which story it is. It might not even be in this edition, this 7th edition, but there's a story that in one of the essays in the back of the chapter, and there's a story of a rich kid that is going to inherit an enormous fortune of money, young kid. The older relative, who's next in line to inherit all that money, is there caring for the small child. And the kid goes into the bathroom to take a bath, and the older relative decides that he wants all that money. He's going to go in there and actually drown the kid in the bathtub. So the way this hypothetical story goes is that he walks into the bathroom and he sees the kid in the bathtub, but it surprises the kid, and the kid slips, falls, hits his head on the bathtub, and he lands face down in the water. So the way this hypothetical story goes is that the older relative stands there and watches the kid die, but technically he didn't force the kid to hit his head, and he didn't force the kid to drown. He just simply allowed the natural course of things to take place, and then the kid died. And so some would argue that the difference between that the intent doesn't really matter as much as whether it's a legitimate reason to either want to die or not want to die, and that sometimes these things that we put up there are just artificial about that. And that if it's right for someone to die, like if we talk about someone with Alzheimer's that doesn't want to live that way for 10 years, then they should be able to. But sometimes just allowing someone to die is not as ethical, especially like if it goes on for weeks at a time. What if someone is at the end of their life and it drags on for, say, 3 months, costs an extraordinary amount of money, the person's in extreme discomfort? Is it better to allow them to die, or would it be better for us to help them die if we determine that's the right thing? I don't know. Does that make any sense? No? Confusing?
It does.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. That's at least just part of your conversation, I guess. All right, I'm going to go through a few other key things that were in the Boss book. We talked about how euthanasia comes from the Greek meaning good death. We've talked about a little bit about the sanctity of life, and sanctity of life is a big one when we talk about abortion. It's interesting because tonight we didn't talk very much about the sanctity of life, but we did talk about the quality of life and how important that was. We talked also about the liberty, libertarianism, that the right to choose is our own course of action is really important. Autonomy, being able to make our own decisions, self-determination seems to be very important. It seems like this group would rate autonomy and self-determination as very high on the list of important things. There's a term that I want you to be, there's actually two terms that I want you to know. Let's see. I'm going to put them in the chat. Non-malfeasance is the duty to do no harm. And then beneficence, let's see if I can find that in the notes. Beneficence. Here they are. There they are. Non-malfeasance is the duty to do no harm. I believe if you take the Hippocratic Oath, you have to agree to that. Am I right? And beneficence is actually the duty to do good. So one of them is that you just have a duty to do no harm. Beneficence is the duty to actually do good. And when it comes to euthanasia, those are two important factors. Let's see here. All right. I'm going to go through more specifically about the different types of euthanasia. Active euthanasia is active involuntary euthanasia is generally regarded as murder, so it is rarely controversial. Passive voluntary euthanasia is generally regarded as allowing a person to die of natural consequence or natural causes, so it is rarely controversial. Passive involuntary euthanasia generally occurs when physicians no longer exhaust all possible means to keep a person alive. This often occurs at the request of the family because the ill person has no living will and the family believes it best to allow the person to die. Note that in the book, I think it's maybe at the beginning of the chapter, Terry Schiavo, her case fits into this category. It's where she was in a wreck, ended up on a machine to keep her alive. Her parents did not want her taken off, but she had no hope of recovery, so her husband did. And then there was this big court case where she got left on the machine to keep her alive for many years before a court case decided she could be taken off of it. That's passive involuntary because she didn't have a living will, a DNR, she was young. So that was passive involuntary when they finally took her off, because she never said anything about wanting to be taken off or that she didn't want excessive means to keep her alive. There just wasn't any information about it. So, and then the fourth one is active voluntary euthanasia, and sometimes it's called a mercy killing by its supporters, and suicide or murder by its opponents. And active voluntary euthanasia occurs when a person chooses to end his or her life through a lethal injection or some other means to bring about an end to the suffering. And active voluntary is the most controversial category of euthanasia because we do value autonomy and self-determination, but we also value the sanctity of life, and we kind of have some problems with that. All right, when it comes to philosophers and theologians on euthanasia, some communities have encouraged active euthanasia, that's the intentional ending of your life, to preserve vital resources for the community. Back in 65 AD and before that, the Roman philosopher Seneca and the early Stoics taught that human life ought to quit nobly when they are no longer socially useful. That was Roman philosopher Seneca. Then we have the Inuit Eskimo, who, when near death, he or she would walk into the frozen tundra. I'm guessing it wouldn't take too long on a night like tonight in order to die, that he or she would not be a burden to the community. So we did talk briefly about being a burden, the duty to die, so that you wouldn't be a financial or other type of burden to the community. And with the Inuit Eskimo, when they near death, they were expected to walk into the frozen tundra to die. According to the laws of Manu, that's M-A-N-U, an elderly Hindu man could obtain enlightenment if he were to walk in a northwesterly direction until his body sunk to the earth, but only if he had seen the sons of his sons and he felt like he was becoming a burden to his family. When we go to the philosopher and ethicist Aristotle, he believed that willful euthanasia was wrong. Virtue, and Aristotle was a virtue ethicist that seeks to create and nurture virtue in people. He argued that virtue ethics requires that we face death bravely rather than taking the cowardly way out by quitting life in the face of pain and suffering. So Aristotle said that we should face death bravely and not quit on life, even in the face of pain and suffering. Many others since Aristotle have argued that suffering may be redemptive, so suffering is not a sufficient reason to accept death. And the best way that I would describe that is, have you ever been through something that was very painful, very uncomfortable, you would never want to do it again, but you got something valuable out of it? Anybody ever done that?
Yup.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, that's called redemptive suffering. That even when we go through really, really painful things, maybe a loved one dies, maybe we make terrible mistakes, maybe we get in, maybe we have a health crisis. But if we face those scary things, that when they always leave us a gift. And, maybe it's just that, you know that if you can face that and get through it, you can get through anything? Or maybe it's courage, or maybe it's just part of your identity that you went through something that painful and you made it. There's always just gifts. I look through the most painful experiences of my life. Most of them I don't ever want to do them again, but I did go through them and I did get something of value out of them. So Aristotle's saying in Virtue Ethics that redemptive suffering is something that we should embrace, not run from. The Pythagoreans wrote the Hippocratic Oath, and they opposed euthanasia on the grounds that the gods are our keepers and we are the possessions of the gods. And to go along with the Pythagoreans, many religious people argue that we do not have a right to commit suicide because we belong to God. I grew up in an Assembly of God church, and they explicitly taught that it was a sin to commit suicide, to end your life. Thomas Aquinas, who was incredibly important to ethics through the Catholic Church, incorporated the Aristotle prohibition against suicide into his natural law theory, arguing that suicide is unnatural and immoral. And Aquinas' views continue to have a big impact on the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church to this day. Again, I just want to emphasize that this is an argument against active euthanasia, not the argument against passive euthanasia. When it comes to Immanuel Kant, who championed the categorical imperative, he considered suicide and voluntary euthanasia immoral because, we actually balanced, we discussed what's more important, the quality of life or the quantity of life. I guess he would balance it between the sanctity of life and the quality of life. He said that, and the freedom and autonomy. He was weighing autonomy versus our duty to embrace the sanctity of life. And he said that suicide does not fulfill the requirement of the categorical imperative because it involves a contradiction, that we use our autonomy to destroy our autonomy by destroying ourselves. And he said that Immanuel Kant said that people who want to end their lives also show a lack of respect for themselves by viewing their lives as a means only rather than an end. And I guess you could say that if you see your life as a means only, it's only for a certain amount of joy, but that we should see that our lives in and of themselves are an end, not a means to an end. If we want to talk about some of the nasty sides of euthanasia, in Nazi Germany, up to 100,000 mentally ill and disabled children and adults considered incurable were used to grant what they called a mercy death. The public debate over euthanasia resumed after the 1950s with the development of a new life-sustaining technology such as mechanical respirators. You should be aware of some of the key legislation surrounding euthanasia. The 1976 California Natural Death Act allowed individuals under certain circumstances to make decisions in advance about the kind of treatment that they would receive at the end of their lives. That's, what we call now a living will. There was a landmark case in 1990 called Cruzen versus Director, Missouri Department of Health, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that every competent individual has a constitutional liberty right to be free of unwanted medical treatment if there is clear and convincing evidence of the patient's desire to have the medical treatment withdrawn. That's one in which, maybe you want your life to end, maybe you want to die of natural causes, but perhaps a doctor or medical professionals, or maybe you're the person in charge of your well-being, a family member says no, saying that in some cases, most cases, you really do have a right to withhold unwanted medical treatment. In 1994, the citizens of Oregon approved a ballot measure 16, also known as the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, which would legalize euthanasia under certain circumstances. I know that in Northern Territory of Australia and quite a few places around the world, including the United States, they are allowing terminally ill patients to end their life by pill or lethal injection, and permitting physicians to help anyone who is terminally ill to do so. But I think there's only a few places in the United States you can do it. But I think last time I looked, maybe there was like 12 or 13 places. I'm not sure. If anybody knows the answer to that, let me know. Dr. Jack Kevorkian in the 90s was dubbed the Doctor of Death. That's probably an important one for you to know. I think that's on the test. And he appealed to the individual's autonomy as he assisted in more than 100 what he called mercy killings. When we take a look at more closely about the religious communities in the United States, their attitudes towards euthanasia, the Roman Catholic Church suggests that physicians have a moral duty to use to use ordinary but not extraordinary measures to prolong life. So basically, the Catholic Church does accept passive euthanasia but opposes any kind of active euthanasia. When we talk about different churches and the way they approach euthanasia, evangelical Protestant churches, that would be similar to like the Crossing, Madison Park, evangelical free churches, some Baptist churches, a lot of mega churches. Most evangelical Protestant denominations have official resolutions condemning active euthanasia as murder or suicide, but most of them support, or maybe all of them support, voluntary passive euthanasia. Whereas mainline Protestant churches, and that would be the equivalent, I don't know if you know it or not, but Culver-Stockton is actually a Christian Church Disciples of Christ college. So technically it's a Christian college, but that denomination, as well as mine, the United Church of Christ, Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Episcopalian, those mainline church denominations recognize that we must sometimes allow a person to die. So passive euthanasia is okay. However, some mainline churches are willing to support patients who wish to hasten death, even supporting active voluntary euthanasia. Two examples would be in 1991, the United Church of Christ, my denomination, issued a resolution concerning the rights and responsibilities of Christians regarding human death. And 5 years later, the United Methodist Church in 1996 helped coin the term death with dignity in a resolution that they did that would affirm that there are some cases in which autonomy and the ability to choose active voluntary euthanasia would be good. So churches like the United Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ think that the distinction between active and passive euthanasia is an artificial one. They would ask the question, aren't we responsible for what we fail to do as much as we are for what we do? And they ask, why force someone to continue to suffer when death seems inevitable and they want to die? And probably one argument that churches would make, or religious people would make that support that, would be, we don't force our pets to live in very uncomfortable situations. Why do we do that to humans? When my cat got ill, I took him to the vet and they said, this is it. And he was really uncomfortable. He wasn't eating and he wasn't doing those other things that pets are supposed to do. And there was no fixing him. So instead, he could have lived longer, but I didn't want him to suffer. So I did what people do, and I just was there with him. And when I left, he wasn't in pain anymore. So organizations like the United Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ, they think that the same principles apply to humans, that there are some cases in which it's just morally acceptable and we shouldn't pretend that it's. I don't know. What do you all think about that? Any thoughts? Should we have the same standards for humans that we do for our pets, or should they be different?
They should absolutely be the same.
I agree. They should be the same.
Yeah.
I agree they should be the same, but I think it's harder for us to like put it into perspective when it's a human. Because like when it's our pet, like I don't know, like Allie and Jalen were both saying like they with their animal. I also had a similar situation, and like it was easier for us to admit that like my dog ended up having a brain tumor, so like that's why we had to put him down. But like I feel like in those cases it's easier for us to admit that it's what's in the best case it is for a human sometimes. I definitely agree they should be the same, like they shouldn't be looked at like that.
I think sometimes it's complicated with humans because sometimes we have complicated relationships. Sometimes people haven't treated us very well. Sometimes we haven't treated them very well. Then we have to make a decision about the end of their life. Sometimes it's hard. I agree with Charlie though. And I agree with all of you that said that, we shouldn't have different standards, but I think sometimes that the human element gets in the way and makes it challenging for us. Any other questions about euthanasia or any of the stuff we've gone over tonight?
Nope, none.
Okay. Well, next Monday, 6 p.m., hopefully we can all gather back in our classrooms. Have we really only been in our classroom one time this semester?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
How has that been for you all? Like, I mean, this was supposed to be an in-person class. Has it been okay?
It's been fine for me.
Yeah, I think it's been fine.
I thought we've had good discussions even online still, so.
That's what I was gonna say. There's enough discussion to where it's not hard to be on Zoom.
Good. Good, because this is really the first semester. I've taught this class, like I think 11 or 12 times, but I never actually had any Zoom meetings on for any of my classes before. So I just wondered what it was like for you as a student. So thanks for sharing. If you have a different experience, let me, email me or message me or say it right now if you want. I mean, it's okay, but I just want to do all I can to help make it a good experience for everybody. And did everybody go ahead and get the review sheet? I'm going to go ahead and just throw it up there. It's in your email. Review sheet midterm. Okay. There's one thing I'm trying to avoid, and that is like, this is the first time I ever taught a class and we only had 2 topics that we covered on the midterm. Usually there's 3 or 4, but because we started after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it was on a Monday that we had off, then we started a week behind after everybody pretty much. So I'm trying to make sure that I get all of the stuff for animal rights and the environment out of this review sheet and out of the midterm exam. But if I missed anything on the review sheet and you look it up and it has something to do with the environment or animal rights, just because I missed it and overlooked it, you can ignore it. There's not going to be anything about animal rights or the environment in this class this semester.
Is there anything with animal rights that has to do with euthanasia?
No. I don't have anything on the exam about it, and I don't think there's anything in the book about it for the maybe there's a mention of something, but there's nothing substantial.
Okay.
If you can see down here, there's where it gets to the essay section. Everyone's expected to do question number 2. Choose an ethical issue we've covered, which is, well, there it is. I messed it up, didn't I? I said abortion, euthanasia, or environmental and animal rights in class. Okay, I screwed that one up. It would only be abortion and euthanasia. I suppose if you wanted to take on environmental and animal rights, you could. So I'm not gonna, it's on there. So I guess I would accept it. But since we didn't actually cover that, you probably don't want to do that. But everybody has to do number 2. And then you can choose either number 1, number 3, number 4, or number 5. You can choose that for your second essay. Each essay is going to be 3 to 5 paragraphs. Make sure you give me good answers and hints for acing and not just passing the section. Define all key concepts and terms. Assume that you're writing for an audience that is intelligent but not necessarily knowledgeable about this topic. Each supporting paragraph should be organized around a topic sentence that supports your thesis statement, what you're arguing, and generalizations tend to be weak unless they're supported with specific examples or illustrations. So if you can reference the book, if you can reference specific ethicists that talk about these issues, if you can talk about, the more you can tell me about your ethical framework, those are the kind of things that I'm going to be looking for. And if you give me a concept and you give me an illustration to help understand, that's even better. But realize it is only 3 to 5 paragraphs, but make them count. So sometimes the multiple choice questions are hard and people don't score real high on them. I like to be generous with my essay grading. So make sure they're really good, because that'll be a good way that you can make up any lost points on the multiple choice portion of the test. Is that, the 50 multiple choice are going to be worth 50%, and the 2 essays are worth, each of them is worth 25 each, so that makes out 100%. So and this is worth 15% of your grade. So I would recommend that you practice your essays and you know what you're going to write ahead of time. Make sure that you have the data in your head about the ethicists, things like that. The things that help you get good grades on your essays that you just wrote, a lot of those concepts, if you involve them in these, it'll be good as well. Any questions?
So we only have to do 2 essays, the one that's required, and then we pick another one.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. And then there's 50 multiple choice questions. Any other questions about the midterm? You will have 2 hours to take them. I don't think it's going to take anybody 2 hours, but I just give you that kind of time frame. I did have one student that stayed the entire 3 hours, and I think they finished most of it in an hour, and then they labored over like 3 questions for the next 2. And I just decided there's no way I'm sitting around from 6 to 9. for that anymore. So there's 2 hours. That should be plenty of time. I guess if you really need more time, you know, talk to me and I might be willing to be flexible, but 2 hours should do it. Once you're done with the exam, you're done and you can go. All right, well, that pretty much wraps everything up for me. Did you all have anything else?
No, I don't think so.
No.
All right, well, you've been a fantastic class. Thanks for all your discussion tonight. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'll see you later.